a paper review with my two guests this morning. Governance experts, I'll call them that. Actually, they are governance experts and governance analysts, to be more apt. Suba Churchill, Executive Director, Kenya National Civil Society Center, as well as Ruth Ambogo, Political Strategist and Governance Analyst. As we look through the papers, good morning, gentlemen and lady. Asante.
Good morning. Thank you.
Asante sana. And Suba, it's been a while. Were you waiting on a cabinet slot? And now that it's now come, but it's not too late. The PS's position still to be announced, the CAS. But maybe you're content with leading from the Kenya National Civil Society space.
Yes.
Good morning to you, sir.
Morning, morning.
All right, let's get to the papers. And I'll start with the Daily Nation. And if we will just patch that on the screen right behind me, just to look at how the different dailies have decided to frame the unveiling of the cabinet. And for the Daily Nation, it is winners and losers in Ruto's first cabinet. And in a ruthless wipeout, they term it, of the remains of the Uhuru era, the president crafts a heavily political executive by rewarding senior politicians in his Kenya Kwanza camp, but not all good. All got the spoils of the new regime. Understandably, this report is on page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 10, given the importance and anticipation for this. And yes, I don't know what you think in terms of the framing of this, winners and losers in Ruto's first cabinet. At least it is the proposed cabinet, and that is if they make it through. Who do you see, in your view, as the biggest winner and the biggest loser? I'll start with you, Suba.
You know, Mark, in a country like Kenya, where everything is seen through ethnic lenses, and you remember when the public was asked to make their comments.
Yeah.
There are those who felt that they did not see one of their own. There are those who felt that their counties were left out. I saw Nyeri, for example, saying yes, it is good, but we didn't see one of our own. Yet the deputy president comes from Nyeri County. I saw the similar cry in Nandi County. Yeah. And they forget that the president himself, Uasin Gishu is like a cosmopolitan place.
Right.
Where everybody goes, it's like Trans Nzoia, it's like a settlement scheme. So I saw some outcry from Nandi County and people saying, but looking at the cabinet, yes, it is the most political cabinet that has ever been appointed after the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution. Right. Those of us who are privileged to be at the Bomas Constitutional Conference and who framed the Constitution and preferred that ministers or cabinet secretaries, as we call them, be non-members of parliament, had this idea, which increasingly is becoming lofty, that they be technocrats. They be people who are completely divorced from partisan politics. Yes. Yet, apart from, it's much easier to count those who are not politicians in this proposed cabinet list. Yeah. If you look at Rebecca Miano, for example, that is perhaps one of the few. Njuguna Ndung'u, of course, a very strategic appointment considering what he was able to do during the Kibaki era. I think as governor of Central Bank, he must have played a very important role in steering the economy towards a trajectory of growth that was witnessed during that time. You could also count on Zakaria Njeru in lands, housing and urban development. They are quite far in between. But it is, and of course Davis Chirchir is a very, I would say, a political person. The rest is what we used to have under the former constitution, who are either serving, this is the most interesting part this year, still serving members of parliament, either senators or members of the National Assembly, or people who contested and lost, including some of the the young ladies that I see here, who of course will go a long way in representing the face of young people. All right. But the fact that, it's one of the most political cabinet that has ever been appointed under the new constitution points to a pattern that, increasingly is going to compromise the perceived impartiality of members of cabinet. And we have some of them here who have said, you know, certain things that will definitely come to haunt them during the vetting process.
That's right.
They have made certain remarks about certain regions.
And as well as some of them having charges against them in court.
Against them.
And we'll be getting to that in a bit. Let me give a chance to Ruth Mbogo to respond. But Suba hasn't quite talked about who he thinks are the winners and the losers in this list of nominees. But let me tilt it a bit, the framing of this, and look at, in your view, if the Kenyans largely looking at the nominees are the winners or the losers in this case in terms of who will serve them?
I had a direct answer for the winners and losers, but to first of all answer your question.
Let me give you a chance. Shoot.
Well, for me, I think the winners in this cabinet appointments for the first time are women, to some extent, in the sense that for the first time, I, as Ruth Mbogo, a gender activist,
yes,
somebody who's been very passionate about the implementation of the two-third gender principle, is not sitting here today and complaining that we have not achieved the two-third gender principle.
Yes.
But then again, in retrospect, in terms of political promises, because remember, there is what the law requires you to achieve. That is Section 81B of the Constitution, where it states that, you know, not more than two-thirds of elective or appointive bodies should be, Article 81B should be of the same gender. So I think with regards to the constitutional requirements, then the winners here are women, because we can see at least the two-third gender principle has been achieved. Okay. But in terms of political promises, remember, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, the president, promised during when he was appointing the deputy president as a male, when everybody else was picking women, he said that, you know, for him, he will compensate by ensuring that half of his cabinet would be women. So I think in terms of political promises, he failed to deliver to women.
And we'll get to that.
Cabinet.
And then I want us to save that for later, yeah.
The losers in this case for me are the youth. We clearly don't have a young person in this cabinet. Okay. And you see, young person, I don't mean youthful. We are not talking about somebody who looks youthful, like, let's say, Rosalinda Soipian. We are talking about a young person below, a young person by the definition of the Constitution, which is that you are below the age of 35. So we don't have representation of below the age of 35, which is quite unfortunate, given the fact that a majority of the people who supported the president actually are below the age of 35. Okay. And then again, the other people that we would consider as losers is the general, sorry to say, and I would want to agree with one of the commentators who was asked a question on the street, that where is Mama Mboga, where is the border person on this cabinet? But to compensate for that, you might want to look at the stories of some of these people. You see, when we talk about, let me not say when they talk about, because I didn't subscribe to the bottom-up economic model, when they talk about bottom-up economic model, and they're talking about a hustler being elevated, one would imagine that a true hustler would be placed on that cabinet. And we are not saying that the time is gone. Maybe it is important for us to raise this question so that when they're appointing PSs, can we have at least a true reflection of that face? Let's not have people whose stories reflect of are a reflection of people who came from bottom to up now. Let them be slightly, you know, at the bottom coming up to the middle, so that we can give them a chance to show us how they can actually rise to the top and also help Kenyans. Then finally, to answer your question, are Kenyans winners or losers? Kenyans are winners to some extent, because when you look at some of the appointments here, they are very serious individuals. I'll give an example of somebody like Rebecca Miano. This is a lady whose you know, CV is quite vast. I'll look at an example. I'll give an example of Penina Malonza, also quite vast. I'll look at examples of the finance minister, you know, Njuguna Ndung'u, as we had mentioned. And basically, to some extent, we are winners, but to some extent, we are also losers, because when your cabinet is full of, not full of, but when a great percentage of your cabinet is politicians, you might want to be worried a bit. For example, look at the example of, for instance, sorry to say this, but I will give an example of Aden Duale in the Ministry of Defense. Defense is quite a sensitive ministry that requires somebody who does not necessarily by nature subscribe to a style of politics or a way of life that interests are placed first. For politicians, and I have been one, or rather I still am one, I will hope to become elected at some point. As a politician, your way of thinking is you are conditioned to think about interests. Right. What are my interests first? What are the interests of the president first? But now you see a ministry like defense, you can't place a person whose mentality is conditioned to think about interest first, because at the end of the day, what if their personal interests supersede the interests of the country? What if the person who appoints them, the interests of that person supersede the interests of the nation? So we must ask ourselves, winning or losing, it's neither here nor there, so it's yes and no.
Well, Dwale isn't here to give a response to that, but I'm sure he probably, if he's watching, he'll tweet. But, and in a pushback, the administration might say, because of their new approach, the CSs will be held to account, not just by House committee, but by parliamentarians directly. They will be summoned to Parliament to answer questions. So perhaps in their defense, they will say that there will be a higher level of accountability that is held on them. Speaking of accountability, this is what the Business Daily is going with, the 4 men who could make or break Ruto government, and that is Davis Chirchir, who has been proposed for the Energy and Petroleum Ministry, Professor Jogona Ndongo, who has been proposed for Treasury, and Mithika Linturi, who has been proposed for Agriculture docket, Simon Chelugui, the Cooperative and SMEs docket nominee. Who else do you see has quite a load on their shoulders in terms of expectations and where we find ourselves as a country, Suba?
Yes, you know, first of all, commenting on the 4, one of the reasons why that headline is apt is because we are, the new government is taking over at a time when food security has assumed a completely different dimension. We have seen Kenyans, you know, resorting to eating carcasses of animals died in the wild.
Yes.
We have seen, the prices of commodities, and all this is driven by the price of energy, be it electricity or petroleum. And the coming into the proposal to have Davis Chirchir would really determine how the cost of living is finally brought down, because the president, in his wisdom, has decided that he's not going to subsidize continue with the arrangement that there was by the regime that he was part of. You know, we say, we talk as if, the president was not part of.
He's a newcomer.
He's not a newcomer as such.
Yes.
He has been part of the regime.
Yes.
And even the outgoing cabinet, I want to assume that, he was responsible for almost half of the appointment of half of the outgoing cabinet. They may have fallen out with some of them along the way.
Yes.
But they were not entirely strangers. And so the idea of retaining some of them is just acknowledging that, gentlemen, we have been working together. There are some of you may have gone overboard. In any case, I mean, if you have served for, 10 years, and today's cabinet ministers serve for long, unlike the previous regimes during the Moi era, people used to serve as short as, a few months. So that's the point. And Chelugui is very critical.
Yes.
For the hustler, the bottom-up thing, because it's about SMEs, other than the cooperatives. Remember the president, during, I think, his swearing in, clarified that he would wish to see a situation where, those who want to benefit from the hustler fund, form structures. And he's aware of this because if you do not insist on that and allow applications from individuals, we know Kenyans for carrying money in sacks across the road. So he does not want a repeat of that. And it's not that those funds have never existed. There's nothing novel about the Hustlers Fund. We have had the Youth Enterprise Fund. We have had the Women Enterprise Fund. We have some of the funds, for example, those that are under the women representatives, that also, go towards those lines. But he kind of wants to have a framework that makes those funds a reality and sustainable, and that, people who are given those funds are really able to demonstrate. Because come 2027, and I'm sure the president would want to succeed himself, like all politicians would, he would want to demonstrate that his bottom-up has worked. Because if it will not have worked, he will be shown the exit door. And so that's why those Chelugui becomes very, 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 very important. Agriculture, where, Mithika Linturi is going to take over from his neighbor, it's very critical, because that's where production is. And so we cannot, consume before we produce.
Okay.
We cannot rely on importing every food material that we need,
right.
even if we do not produce enough for the population. But by and large, I think the focus is going to be on production, fertilizer, and so on and so forth. So that's why those four become very, very critical. But you know also that, related to all these are issues of, education, which is very, very key. We know that, there is all this debate about the CBC.
Yes,
and so the appointment of Machogu, though, cut in the mold of an administrator, yes. We are yet to see his negotiations and maneuvering skills, because education is one area where, stakeholders are very, very vocal. And so I see education as very, very critical.
Yes.
I, of course, also see that the arid and semi-arid lands at a time when, there are all this drought, water, and sanitation that has been given to Alice Wahome. All these, are going to play a role in complementing whatever agriculture is going to do. You cannot talk about agriculture without talking about, water, sanitation, and irrigation, and so on and so forth.
You've mentioned someone here, and I want us to take a break, but a quick reaction to what you've just mentioned from Ruth, and I'll let Ruth as well speak to the headline of the Business Daily. Former DO to head education docket, and that is Ezekiel Machogu, the nominee for Education Cabinet Secretary, is probably the only man to have served the 4 previous governments and is now on the cusp of serving the 5th. Any apprehensions here as you see this being the nominee for such an important education docket?
Well, I think the fact that he's been trusted by all these administrations speaks to his qualifications as an individual, speaks to his qualifications in terms of delivery and service. And you see, at the end of the day, as a young person who is watching some of these appointments, I think what I am learning, and I hope my fellow young people are learning, is that, consistency in terms of doing, being the best at what you do, And you could just be a teacher somewhere, aiming for the best, aiming that 20 years from now, one day you will be a CS for education. Yes. The consistency in terms of what you do, the consistency in terms of providing solutions to the country's problems, the consistency in terms of being very vocal on questions of education, in terms of trying to fit into spaces where solutions are being sought, can actually get you to the top. And I think for me, life has always been all about consistency. And I mean, congratulations to him for landing again into this government. We pray that, he takes over the job that Magoha has done. Magoha did a beautiful job with the Education Ministry, if you ask me. I pray that the Kenya Kwanza government actually seeks to retain CBC, because at the end of the day, when you look at the kind of, the quality that it is producing, rather the changes that it is now bringing forth into the lives of our children and our siblings, it's quite, I mean, the challenges are here and there. Yeah. And sometimes when something is new, there are teething problems. But given time and given a few changes here and there, things would work out best for us. So I think, I pray that as an education minister, personally from my point of view, I don't have a child, but I'm looking at the kind of children who, the quality of lives of children who are undergoing CBC, and how the same is changing in terms of how they interact with society and their thinking process. I pray that as an education CS, one of the biggest prayers he makes to the president is to retain CBC and maybe just, tweak it a bit to make sense for parents who find it overwhelming. All
right, because there were hiccups in the implementation of the same, and I know you want to give a point on that, because this is a talking point, the education docket, and the importance of the same, but there's a task force being put in place to review that, as well as improve on the public participation of an implementation of a CBC. But we'll be getting back to the review and finalize that, get into the discussion in a moment. I just need to take a break at this point, but AM Live will be back shortly.
Do you know why they call me Sugar? It's because I bring the flavor, the heat, the spice, and the vibes on Kenyan radio. When a song plays on my show, it moves from being a hot song to a hit to a classic. When I interview you, you become a household name. And for every brand that advertises on this show, they move from being a brand to the brand. If you want to be seen, felt, and heard, you know where to be. This is the place every Monday to Friday on 96.3 Nation FM. It's the Nation FM Drive with yours truly, Anto, Neo, Soul. So kiss, mwah! Every other frequency, goodbye, and keep it right here, 96.3 Nation FM, where good music lives.
Now this is what we call convergence. Come through for the morning fix this and every single Friday right here on NTV. Yes, it's about that time.
You know, the coolest thing about mornings is that a girl and two guys together in the mix, you never know what to expect. You guys are crazy.
From Friday 6, bring your good vibes, bring your picks. From 7 a.m., it's a dope mix. Every single thing on Friday changes with the morning fix.
Nation FM is the home of good music. I want to find out how many people in this building believe just that. So we're going to do a sing-along challenge, and I want you to come with me. Let's go check it out.
Nina peste yangu tumekuja klabu kazi zimekuchokoza.
Wapi tofauti yako nao sina noma naye. Oh, oh, oh.
Tumekuja chokoza.
Welcome back to AM Live. We're going through the dailies and looking at the headlines, some of the stories that they have decided to focus on, but not giving too much away. We'll be done with this in a bit and getting into the discussion on the unveiled proposed 22-member cabinet for President William Ruto, and look at some of the reactions on what are the pros and cons possibilities, as well as the hopes and the anxieties. This is the headline for the Business Daily, the four men who could make or break Ruto government. And Ruth Mbogo, you wanted to make a point on this. They are holding heavy dockets. Ideally, or essentially, any cabinet member who would fail on their assignment would be bad for the administration, but there's more weight on the four that have been cited here by the Business Daily.
Yes, I do believe that over and above the four, and I wonder why, sorry to say this, why I wanted to comment was because why is it that, you know, we have quite a number of women appointees, but yet they are not being viewed as people who could potentially make or break the Ruto administration. And why I say so is because, remember, at the end of the day, Mark, at the end of the day, what matters to me as a Mwananchi is, if I'm living in Nairobi,
yes.
At the end of the day, what matters to me is that, for instance, if I fall sick, can I be able to access healthcare? When I leave my house, do I have water to be able to take a shower and come to studio? At the end of the day, the question also becomes that the house that I'm living in, let's say, for example, I'm married, will I live in a safe environment in terms of I will not be able to face gender-based violence because I understand that I'm protected by certain laws, that at the end of the day, when food becomes, you know, will I eat? You know, will I have lunch to eat? Will my children have food to eat? And thank God, I don't know, in whatever wisdom the president had, the Solomonic wisdom he had, in giving those now dockets that touch on the direct lives of Mwananchi to women. And you see, that is why we have always been agitating, as people who've been agitating for the inclusion of women into key decision-making platforms. We have been agitating for that because we understand that at the end of the day, such critical services that touch on the day-to-day life of the Mwananchi can only properly be handled by a woman, because at the end of the day, a man will wake up to go and look for money. He does not want to think that, okay, who is going to go to the river to bring the water that I will shower with, or, you know, where will water come from for me to shower to go to work? A man's mind is conditioned, or roles as our society has put it, is conditioned to think that I will wake up, there's available water, there's tea, I'm leaving the house, my wife will take care of everything else. So the women in this cabinet could seriously make or break this cabinet, and with a special focus on Aisha Jumwa. We have to be honest, because we must also talk about how people reacted to some of these names.
Right.
There was serious reaction, massive reaction on Aisha
Question there
Jumwa's.
being was there consideration of what the big word meritocracy?
Exactly, that's where I would like to come to. That the question for most people was this a reward to political people who are making the loudest noise in the political camp, or was it, you know, a meritocracy-based kind of appointment where we are saying that?
And you think?
And what I think now is to just allow me to say that I would want to say that sometimes we might look at meritocracy from totally different angles. That as somebody is thinking that for Aisha Jumwa to hold that position of public service and gender, she must be what the previous holder of that office was. That is Professor Margaret Kobia. You know, we are thinking of Aisha Jumwa and comparing her to Margaret Kobia, who was an entire professor with so many, I think she had maybe 2 doctorates, you know, with masters and PhDs and degrees all over the place, and then she's being replaced by a politician. But what if we look at it from a different angle, in the sense that maybe what she's bringing to the table is the experience of the ground experience, you know, because remember, this is public service where we are not just talking about public servants who are earning $1 million shillings in government or more than that, or the president. We are talking about public service which includes, for instance, from the cleaner, from the tea server, from the person who sweeps that compound, you know, to all the way back up to the president. So we are talking about somebody who will be dealing with the most basic of people. And when we look at Aisha Jumwa, first of all, when you look at her history, this is a woman who has undergone basically a life of the true definition of being a hustler. You know, you look at her story, it is said that she actually grew up in poverty, and then, you know, at Form 2, she gave birth, she had to drop out of school, come back to school, attempted, you know, did everything she could to finish her education, and at least got a degree out of it all, yeah? So at the end of the day, meritocracy is not necessarily the PhDs we are bringing to the table, but what ground experience are we bringing to the table? Remember, in Malindi, where traditionally, when we look at gender issues in terms of leadership, women are not necessarily trusted, or rather are not necessarily expected to hold or fight for seats that men naturally go for, like MP seats. And yet she served as the Malindi constituency member of parliament, not a woman representative. In fact, I was reading her story where it is said that Raila Odinga used to refer to her as Mekatilili Wamenza, that a woman who comes from a community that does not believe in women leadership but has fought to be at that space where she's a member of parliament. Yeah. For her to get to that point, one would want to expect that by the time she was finishing 5 years of being in office, she understands what gender issues are, you know?
May I put it to you, though, because on your earlier argument that is criticizing or critiquing the nomination of Aden Duale to the defense docket, that the same argument you're putting forth for Aisha Jumwa for the public service docket would hold. That much as, you know, meritocracy isn't the case he has seen in his appointment, more for political rewarding, that he also will have a strong team around him and he will be able to deliver. Exactly,
and in fact, that's what I was getting to, that the people who are worried about Aisha Jumwa holding this docket, remember, personally as an individual, I have interacted with this docket when Margaret Kobia was holding the docket. I remember there are times when we have presented papers before her on BBI, you know, on critical issues that affect the country, and I found her to be a very reasonable woman, and I believe that Aisha Jumwa will realize that, you know, to make it, even though people don't believe, a lot of people might not believe in her ability to deliver, that if she invests in getting good advisors, people who understand policy around gender, people who know the trends in gender, people who have studied gender, people who have worked with organizations that, you know, that deal with gender issues and public service issues, that she will definitely deliver. And I mean, from my research yesterday, I was told that, you know, she's a woman who actually listens to advice. So we hope that, you know, she will invest in people like ourselves here and my good friend here, to get the advice that she necessarily needs to steer forward that department. And at the end of the day, she will be a better person out of this. I mean, if we really want a bottom-up person in this government, then if you ask me, she's the representation of bottom-up in Ruto's cabinet.
And we're speaking about the politicians who are dominating the cabinet slots that have been proposed. Baraza la Wanasiasa, this is the headline by the Taifa Leo. And speaking to that issue, there is the question of some of the wins and losses within the cabinet slots. Mlima Kenya wazoa idadi kubwa ya mawaziri. So to this argument, also held with the headline of the Star, Mount Kenya wins big. There is the balancing interest within the region and politically so. And I'd like to borrow from my senior, David Makali, my senior in the profession. And he says, and I'd want you to start with you in response to the balancing of the regional interest in the allocation of the slots. Makali tweets and says, I have been restraining myself, but let me let this off my chest. Western, as in Luya Nation, generally got hooves of the cabinet. The stake was shared by Mount Kenya and Rift Valley, but don't we love positions? Someone famously said, hata mkia ni nyama. The regional balancing act in the allocations, how do you read from it? Central benefiting more from the, in comparison to the other regions?
Yes, definitely. Central, or Mount Kenya as we call it, if you count also the fact that Njeru is from Nakuru, which is politically regarded as part of the larger Mount Kenya region. And you see a definite and an intentional effort by the president to consolidate. You remember, the president found him, the president has put his deputy, and this could be the undercurrents, the unstated undercurrents in the Kenya Kwanza politics. The president went directly to the people. He cannot, the deputy cannot say, you got the votes on my account. Now, when you look at some of the people that have been appointed in Mount Kenya, one question you'd be tempted to ask is, were they recommended by the deputy, or does the president, do they owe it directly to the president?
Yeah.
And I think it is the latter that is the case. And if it is the case that, all these people, we know, for example, Kithure Kindiki, was one of the most serious contestants for the deputy, the running mate position, and lost it, and at some point, kind of briefly stepped out of active politics, only to come back after being persuaded to reconsider his view by the president.
Yes.
That is a person who definitely may not necessarily kowtow to the deputy president. If you look at people like Moses Kuria, he's a strong man. You cannot say that he owes it to to the deputy president and many others. And so what we are seeing is that compared to Rift Valley, and when Rift Valley is talked about here, we are talking about the Kalenjin nation, if at all there's such a thing. They also got quite
Huge.
not huge, because apart from Chirichir, apart from Chelugoi, and Murkomen, and the president himself, I saw Nandi saying, we were expecting to see one of our, another one of our own,
yes,
in the lineup, but there is none.
Yeah.
Of course, there is also a cabinet minister, a lady, Bore from Kericho and so on. But they do not compare to Mount Kenya. So we are seeing a deliberate attempt by the president to completely consolidate, Mount Kenya region, and this is for the future.
Okay.
We are also seeing a deliberate attempt, by rewarding all these politicians. When the president was elected and he went for a service in some church in Bungoma County, and he was saying that I'll honor my pledge to Wetangula, I'll honor my pledge to Modavadi, and he has gone ahead to do that. What is the political catch? All these people must step down from leadership of their political outfits. And so we are going to be, all those regions will be marinated with the UDA. it's UDA marination. Whether it is the Attorney General nominee, Muturi, who is the outgoing leader of DP, whether it is, chap guy, Alfred Mutua, Dr. Alfred Mutua, all those people must step down. And so what are we likely to see? Nondescript people emerging as leaders, people who perhaps every Friday would be going for handouts and being told, enda upeleke watoto hii. And so the president will have a free hand to literally, you know, marinate all those regions with this, you know, UDA party.
Right,
and that is the
yeah.
catch for me.
Yes.
That if the opposition is not careful, this maneuver and this cabinet appointment has far-reaching political implications in terms of the president's projected, you know, growth of his party, UDA. Remember, even when he was contesting in the so-called Kenya Kwanza, he was so tough as to even, you know, field candidates in the strongholds. Mudavadi's MP in his own Sabatia constituency is a UDA person who won. And that tells you that, you know, yes, the president seems to have, you know, ceded to the promise. And of course, it's a good thing in politics. For the first time, we are seeing that happening. Of course, having been a victim himself of the kumi yangu, kumi yako. So he wanted to be seen to be doing that. So that for me is very, very critical. One thing that I would want to add is that when the president was clarifying the roles of the prime cabinet secretary and that of the deputy president, he did some things deliberately. One, he clarified the fact that other than himself and the deputy, the prime cabinet secretary is the third ranking person. And that was very important because you remember in the days of the Grand Coalition government, when there were protocol issues between the then Prime Minister Raila Odinga and Vice President Kalonzo Musyoka, it took quite some time to sort that out. And so for this time around, the president was very, very specific and said, you are third in rank. Okay. That for me was critical, so that the two begin to clarify to themselves some of the issues that could be gray in terms of their positions in government.
Okay, Ruth, I'd like us to make the last comment here on the issues on the headline and to speak to the regional balancing. I know you're itching to respond to the Luya Nation and whether or not you agree with David Makali that it got the hooves of the cabinet, lakini pia watu husema mkia pia ni nyama.
Well, I know my people are very happy. And by my people, I mean my people from Western are very happy that they've gotten the big chunk of the meat. But if you ask me, sorry to, I don't know why I keep saying sorry, but allow me to just say that we've gotten a big chunk of the meat, but we had very little to show for it in terms of numbers, especially when you look at, for instance, Vihiga, where our now, is he the super minister? Where our super minister comes from, the deputy president barely made it, barely got 30% of the vote. So I think that I would want to agree.
Despite the promise of 70%.
He was supposed to deliver 70%. In fact, in his backyard as a principal, if you're told that you should deliver 70% in Western, in your own backyard, you should deliver 90%, you know, because now you have presented before the table that, you know, I am able to bring this percentage of votes to you.
That's right.
So it's interesting. For me, I would want to look at it from the point of view of, first of all, the congratulations to the ladies from Western. In fact, the majority of the ladies in Ruto's cabinet are ladies from Western. This is, for the first time, going to testament. It's a testament for the first time of the reality that actually women from Western are quite educated, knowledgeable, and can deliver. We've never had, we rarely have appointments in government when it comes to cabinet positions. So, and if we do maybe one or two, but now that the number has increased, it's a testament to the fact that women from Western can be tried and tested as people who can lead. But I'm worried for my uncle. We call him uncle. You know, I'm very worried for my uncle Mudavadi, because you could be given a ministry, but when you look at the definition of what you're supposed to be doing in that ministry, one wonders, isn't it just a duplication of roles between you and the deputy president? And my senior here is saying that he doesn't see that duplication of roles, but if you ask me, honestly, I see a total duplication of roles, because what he's supposed to be doing, for instance, number one, he's saying, it is said that he will be assisting the president and the deputy president when they are unavailable, which is basically what the deputy president does when the president is unavailable. So what if the president and the deputy president are all available at all times? Where does that leave him? That you know, he should be able to assist in terms of formulation of policy. But what if Rigathi Gachagua actually invests in very good policy analysts like myself and my senior here,
Are you
and
pitching
says,
for a job?
you know, and says, I'm not pitching, but I'm just saying, what if he says, you know, now me, I want to have Ruth Ambogo and my Sudi here to be in my team, and then we form a very formidable team. Where does that leave Musalia Mudavadi? And then also, I'd be interested to know, you know, it's one thing to be given a docket, and another thing for you to have powers within that docket. We understand how politics works.
Are you reading?
Sometimes,
are you seeing him being a lame duck kind of prime?
It could end up being that way because
Minister.
when you've been given a position whose roles are quite similar to a deputy president, what will end up happening is that what might, and we've seen from Kenya's experience, is that there could be conflict of interest between you and the deputy president. There could be a lot of you could be at loggerheads with him, and if you don't have a proper team, and my advice to my uncle Musalia would be that if he doesn't have a proper team with him, it is going to be, you know, hell on fire. Because remember, we keep saying Rigathi Gachagua is not one man who will be underestimated.
He's not a pushover.
And he's not a pushover. He's not to be underestimated. Even if sometimes people think that he has zero understanding of policy. Remember, he has worked in the Moi government. He was in the Uhuru Kibaki government. He's been in the Uhuru administration. Unlike Musalia, who quite a number of times when he was with Raila Odinga, he missed out on being in government.
Yeah.
So in terms of having a grasp of policy, having a grasp of how government should work, Rigathi might have an upper hand, and I'm told he's also, you know, when he wants his way, he also makes sure his way is achieved. So we pray that Musalia, in his creation of a team around him, he remembers to bring on board not just the elderly, because unfortunately, Mark, people from my community, when they're given positions, they don't think to bring young people on their teams. I wonder why they do that, because at the end of the day, in as much as you need the older people to advise you, you also need young, fresh minds to tell you where the trends are going, what are people thinking about, how do we communicate your agenda. So we pray for our uncle. We hope that he delivers. But we also think that, personally, I think that this is a reward.
Yes.
This is an anticipatory reward for 2027. So may he work very hard. May he consolidate, even as he's there, may he consolidate his own political party. Because at the end of the day, if by the end of these 5 years, Musalia's party is still as weak as it is, I'm telling you, somebody else will be brought on board who will replace him. Because remember, 5 years is a long period of time.
Yeah.
Kingpins can emerge. Younger kingpins than yourself can emerge, who have more influence with the people. And as you know, Doyen and his style of politics, he's all about numbers. So if Musalia focuses only on the policy aspect and on deputizing the president and the deputy president, and forgets to strengthen his political party ANC, and also go back.
He must quit.
Exactly. So and also go back and consolidate his political base.
Yeah.
He will be kicked out, and somebody else will come in.
I laugh, Ruth, as you're submitting your point there, because as you say, you're praying for Anko. It still sounds a lot like you're also asking him to consider employing minds like yourself to help him in his role. And Mr. Suba has already said that the UDA marination is going to actually wipe out some of these party leaders and even parties in the regions with his appointment. But this, last but not least, is not something to look away from. The Hustler cabinet, we're talking about who has a face of the hustler in the cabinet. They go by that headline, that is the Standard. And I also want to, since we've talked about the cabinet a lot, a big story that they have also put focus on hard questions after Gesheru's sudden death. Lawyer Paul Gesheru, who was a suspect at the International Criminal Court over witness bribery claims, was found foaming while lying on his bed. Police are yet to say what killed him, and we're expecting more developments today, something that we will follow, and is given a special report by the Standard on page 6, 7, 8, and 10. In fact, they also look at and term the last moments of Gesheru, his interactions with his family. You want to read that story. So now let's switch lanes to the proper discussion, and I would like to ask my director to open the lines now to give you an opportunity to call in and make your contributions, give your reactions to the 22-member cabinet, proposed cabinet under William Samoei Ruto, the president.